Good morning, everyone. I have the great pleasure of moderating our first general session of P3 2023 on behalf of our sponsor for this session, Aecon. As many of you know, Aecon has been a decades-long participant and there from the beginning in Canada's P3 sector. They are an industry leader that has championed the model and led innovation in its approaches. They've also been a tremendous and long-standing supporter of the Council, for which the Council thanks them profusely. Today, they're providing a platform for us to kick off the discussions on issues, challenges, and opportunities in Canadian P3s about which the Council has heard from both the public and private sectors over the past 18 months in discussions with leaders in each of these sectors. All of these discussions have highlighted the need for finding real, actionable, and actionable solutions to repairing relationships, growing competition, driving innovation, rebalancing risk, and guiding government policies on infrastructure and procurement. This panel will delve into proposed solutions, and we invite all of you to get involved in advocating as agents of change for the industry, starting with your attendance at one of the 5 workshops on the conference agenda tomorrow afternoon. Now I'd like to welcome to the stage Joey Comeau, Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President, Capital for EllisDon, Eitan Ladizinsky, Senior Vice President of Aecon Concessions, Michael Lindsay, President and CEO of Infrastructure Ontario, and Cory Grandy, Deputy Minister, Transportation and Infrastructure for the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador. And just before we get started with our discussion, if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question of our panelists, you can do so by using the P3 2023 app. And we thank again TIPSA for sponsoring the app. Morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Eitan and Joey, let's start the discussion with you. I know both Aecon and EllisDon, together with other private sector participants, have been very vocal in the messaging and feedback provided to procuring authorities about what has worked well in your projects, but particularly what challenges you've faced. Could you tell us a bit more about your challenges and how perhaps that's informed your approach to projects now being procured?
Sure. I guess I'll get started if that's
Sure.
okay, Ted.
Yeah, no worries.
So Eitan and I, we had a quick conversation before, and we decided I'm going to focus a little bit more on the social infrastructure side, and we're going to let Eitan focus on the transit. I tend to be a bit too provocative, and if I get into transit, I'm not sure I'll be able to hold myself.
Leaving me the fun stuff.
Leaving him with the fun stuff. One of the key messages, I think, on the social P3 side or on the infrastructure side is the fact that for the last couple of years, transit has really taken up a lot of the oxygen in the room. And when people were having conversations around partnerships and around risk transfers and the rest of it, what was failing to get recognized is that there were a number of projects that were getting successfully delivered across the country. Social infrastructure projects were successfully getting delivered. Even ourselves this year, I mean, we reached substantial completion on New Toronto Courthouse, Bayers Lake in Nova Scotia, and we're imminently about ready to reach substantial completion on West Park Hospital. All 3 were delivered in a COVID environment, in a very challenged kind of labor market and the rest of it there, and we were able to move those projects forward. And a lot of the conversation or the discussion around where the challenges have been and everything, I guess the message I want to kind of send out to this wider group is they don't exist in the same way on social infrastructure. The partnerships are with the direct authorities or with the direct hospitals or the end user of the asset. The risk transfer has worked in a social infrastructure market for 25, 30 years. These projects are getting successfully delivered. There is, but at the same time, there are challenges. But those challenges that are happening right now are more of a function of the type of the projects that are getting procured even in the social vertical space, than the actual asset class itself. So to kind of get directly on the point there is that there's this widely held view that there's no competition in the vertically, in the vertical market. The problem with that is that if you procure jobs under 500 million, there is competition. But once you procure a social infrastructure job that's over $1 billion, over $2 billion, upwards of $4, sometimes $5 billion, what happens is that there's a distinct challenge that needs to be addressed for that asset class or how that's going to be delivered. And I think sometimes we do have to throw away the notions that to expect that there's going to be 3 bidders. Sometimes we just need to take a step back and face reality. I don't believe there are 3 mechanical subcontractors across the country that have the ability to compete on a project greater than $3 billion or $2 billion. The reason for that's quite a function is because on the looking at, say, the healthcare space, 25% of that is going to be mechanical. It just doesn't exist. So we sometimes get very frustrated when that's there, and we try to work with the authorities, with Cory and with Michael and with other authorities across the country to have them to focus on the specific challenges of where it is, but at the same time defend against what's really permeated the P3 market from some of the immense challenges that has happened in the transit space, and to explain that they're different. They're not getting reflected, and it still surprises me. It doesn't get reflected in bank pricing, doesn't get reflected in just a variety of different areas where even like rating agencies don't, in my view, don't really form a difference. But the experience is now behind us that there is a difference. It needs to be recognized. And some entities such as ourselves are going to form a view saying, not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole anymore. We're going to focus on something else. There are other entities that will figure out how that's going to work. So I think overall, when we're looking at the challenges there, the message I want to get across is on social, vertical, that we've got a size problem, but that would exist regardless of what the model was. So it's not a problem with the P3 model. It's not a problem with how they're being procured, but there are challenges that need to be addressed. And I think that market is still producing some great outcomes for everyone. So that's one of the messaging that we're trying to get back is don't change everything just because it's not working in one asset class. Sometimes just let what we've been doing successfully as a group for the last 25, 30 years, let us just continue delivering.
And Eitan, I know that you can speak to other asset classes with your experience at Aecon, and there are slightly different challenges, as Joey's alluded to.
Well, first of all, I do want to say you can't start a discussion about challenges and issues in this kind of a market without recognizing the 30 years of massive success, not necessarily only in one asset class, but really across a vast spectrum of projects, linear, vertical. I think that's kind of really important to recognize. From an Aecon's perspective also, we've been, a pioneer in this market, and we've been in it from the beginning, dating back to 407 ETR, Kubikud in 104 in Nova Scotia. Sorry, losing my voice. And in recent years also, on some of the landmark projects that we've talked about, I think the experience in this market has allowed the players in the market to actually identify issues and work through issues. And actually, from an Aecon perspective, we've actually been also very successful in, exporting this experience from the local P3 market to other geographies and also other asset classes that are in dire need also of significant infrastructure. I think. So yes, there have been issues that we've had to deal with. I tend to disagree with Joey that those issues were asset class specific. I think there were actual rudimentary issues that had to be dealt with and did come up. We've seen them on a variety of projects and had to do with the procurement process as well as the contracting model that was used. I think it's, we've all been through this in recent years, talking about the key issues about risk allocation that has been, I call this, the model has been perfected to its tipping point, to a tipping point where it suddenly started breaking because there was just too much risk transferred. Specific projects that, were just too complicated and had too much, elements that are foreign and less easy to comprehend and foresee for a period of 3 years or 5 years. Just started creating some challenges on those projects. So the complexity, I think there was a bit of a culture that started developing of a zero-sum game. If one side is making money or if one side is winning, the other is losing, versus what you would expect to see in a real partnership process where it's really achievable to get a win-win solution for some of these deals. I think as a result, we've seen this was a challenge that was kind of like a secondary, that just some participant decided to actually, step aside or take a step back from the process. So this actually created some competition issues, but also for government authorities, just rethinking the model and rethinking how can we bring back everybody into the market to compete and create some good solution for the market. I think, and one of the last issues that I'll mention that we've encountered also is, which I think is again in the process of being changed now, is the actual collaborative process in defining what the project is and in the execution process. I think the contracts were overly prescriptive, generated very adversarial relationships, unfortunately, and those were some of the issues that we've identified. This is nothing new, right? I think the good thing is that both private and public sector have recognized that these things need to change. There has been dialogue, and these things are changing, and they will improve and make their ways into these new markets. I think we're on a good path generally.
So Michael, none of this is new news to you, I know. That you've heard this feedback, I'm sure from many sources and from, generally from the private sector, pardon me. So how has Infrastructure Ontario responded to the feedback that you've received, and what are you doing to address some of these concerns to ensure that we continue to have a robust market?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I just wanted to say thank you to Lisa and team for hosting the event. Linda, thank you to you for moderating. We do this, is what we do, right? We meet with the market at events like this. I've been coming to CCCCP dating back at least to 2014. It's typically before 9 a.m. that we get the first reference to that stock standard joke about the third P in P3s being around partnerships. And I note that our first question plays on that too, talking about psychology as being the third P. I think that's right. And I think we've been trying to find an ever more perfect union, because ultimately at the end of the day, I'll just say it out loud so everybody can hear it, we want the win-win solutions. Mm-hmm. It is not our intent to liquidate every construction company in the country, right? And we have a track record of performance that is remarkable, to your point, Eitan, about what we've been able to achieve in this jurisdiction over the last 30 years through these types of partnerships. So let me tell you what my team has been trying to do. And I'll start with the psychology. We've been trying to bring the right humility, the right solemnity, and the right inquisitiveness to the conversations that we're having. At these conferences, the one-on-ones that we have with stakeholders, the course and conduct of the various procurements and transactions that we do, we're listening. And we hope that you're seeing the evidence that we're attentive. There's been, since 2020, a great proliferation of ways that we've tried to deliver, but also, to your point, continued tweaks within models to try to better optimize, because I think Joey's got an important point. Some asset classes, some project sizes lend themselves better to certain models. But even though we know that to be true, we're trying to make better use of collaborative behavioral assessments, of clean incentives for performance against scopes, milestone payments linked to progress. We're trying to get the balance on risk right. We're disaggregating big projects for the first time in order to create what we think are more easy to wrap one's head around scope for our counterparties to manage, and taking back the integration risk that goes with that. And it's true to say that our projects, even on the social side, are getting a lot more complex, no doubt about it. The days, Joey, of delivering a hospital on just a bricks and mortars basis are over, right? So I think it just behooves us to continue to listen. I trust that you're seeing the evidence of our evolution. I know that I'm seeing the evidence of the success of that evolution. Whether it's the progress on tunneling for subways, where we've used, again, right-sized packages with clean incentives to try to get to milestones fast, whether it's the use of adapted CCDC models to build 4 long-term care homes in the Greater Toronto Area, or whether it's some of what we've done around adoption of progressive models for hospital projects that are creeping over $1 billion in design and construction, and the use of affordability limits and thresholds transparently with our counterparties to understand what we are actually willing to spend, and to spark the right conversation about what the implications are. This conference, these interactions, this is the most important thing that we do. This is how the P comes back into P3s, and so my thanks to everybody who's here, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion over the next couple of days.
That's great. And Cory, over to you with respect to your experience in Newfoundland and Labrador. Surely you've heard the feedback, or some of the echoes of the feedback that have been provided to Michael and his team. How has your experience been in Newfoundland and Labrador, and what adaptations have you brought in listening to the market?
Well, Linda, first let me say what a relief it is to be able to gather with colleagues and hear the type of discussions that we're having. I think it's Newfoundland and Labrador has been a later entrant to the P3 market, and we're building our internal capacity to be able to deliver on what is an important and aggressive infrastructure program for the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. I've had moments over the past year where you feel like you're late getting to the party, and the party is starting to wrap up and everyone's going home. So it's very much a relief to chat with colleagues like Joey to understand, no, the model is not broken. The model is doing great things, and we will continue to tweak and adjust the things that need to be adjusted to make sure it continues to be a success. Newfoundland and Labrador has closed since 2018. Approximately $2 billion in infrastructure projects and 4 different, vertical infrastructure, long-term care facilities, and hospitals. And we're going to continue to use, the P3 model to deliver on a pipeline of projects that our government of Newfoundland and Labrador has announced, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is a little plug for our session today at 4:30 to talk about our pipeline. One of our biggest challenges is being able to ensure that Newfoundland and Labrador is a safe space and an attractive space for builders to come that far east. And we are competing with other jurisdictions, large projects right across Canada and Ontario in particular. And as Joey said, there's only so many builders that operate in that space. So we need you to come east, and we're having great success. We just closed service commencement on the largest infrastructure project in Newfoundland and Labrador in 40 years, the new Corner Brook Hospital. Celebrated the service commencement last week, and it has been a tremendous success. And to that project reach financial close just before the pandemic in 2019, and for a project of that size to be delivered on time to the day during a global pandemic, I mean, it speaks to the strength of the model. And so if we got to adjust things on risk transfer, those are fair conversations to have, and we will have them, and to ensure that the reasons why P3 was, invented in the first place, those reasons still exist, and we'll continue to use, the strength of the model to deliver on important public infrastructure.
Well, let's go on to that theme of the global pandemic and how we've had to all adapt and change, and certainly, hopefully the global pandemic's over, but we've got the residual issues around supply chain, labor shortages, some geopolitical issues, of course, now that are arising around the world, and how that has all impacted, our industry generally, and the changes, I guess, we'll all have to be mindful of to address. Joey, with respect to these kinds of issues, what would you like, as you've got Michael sitting right here, what would you like to hear from him about
Knows where to find me.
how to address those challenges, those challenges that no one even saw coming?
Yeah, it's interesting. Admittedly, I do have Michael on speed dial, just with the projects that we have in front of them and the rest of it there, but it comes down to when you look at supply chain, or you look at, say, for example, labor. I think also the one thing we need to recognize is something has fundamentally changed in the last couple of years. There's a pre-COVID and there's a post-COVID. There is the efficiency you get out of your labor force is different than what you were getting pre-COVID. There are supply chain challenges that happen, and when they're on your critical path, you could be out there sometimes with $100,000 a day of liquidated damages waiting on a part that's supposed to come from Eastern Europe or something like that, that's being impacted because of, global affair issues. And it's one of those areas where we understand the risk transfer. We understand what we've signed up for. But at the same time, the partnership element sometimes does require all parties to put the contract aside and say, no one envisioned that this is what was going to happen. I understand the whole, we have balance sheets and we're there to support the positions we take and support the price we take. But that's in a normal environment. And I think the one thing I would ask for as we continue to explore this model going forward is when something comes out of left field, in left field for everyone, we're talking, there's just some things that are just, you cannot control that, and it's such a small portion, but has such a huge impact. We would love to see partnership be there at those times, where I get it's not a shared risk, but inherently it is, because we're delivering public infrastructure. So that would be my one ask is that when we're looking at those type of projects, when we're looking at those type of challenges, that we don't all, sorry, no offense here, Linda, that we don't all lawyer up, and we don't all get concerned about, where our individual liability is this going to end up, that we just solve the problem in the fairest way possible. Because inherently, that's how you're going to get the best pricing on the next job and the job after that. So, there's risk transfer, there's contracts, but there's partnership in a way about not forgetting what we're all here to do, which is deliver infrastructure.
Please, Michael.
Please. Oh. And I think there's evidence that we're doing that, right? Like Joey cites a very specific liquidated damages amount, which shows it's revealing of your thinking, my friend. But whether it was Wellbrook Place long-term care home, or the 401 expansion, or the new Toronto courthouse, which you've cited already, no doubt, I think both private and public sector have tried to find the ability to bring these projects to conclusion in an admittedly remarkable time. 29 projects have reached substantial completion here in the province of Ontario since 2020. That's a collective achievement. We won't always, I think, manage to get by some of the legalities of the construction industry and what it means to do these major projects. But I think that we are increasingly trying. Now, Joey does bring up one very important subdimension of this question, which is about not only, I think, is our industry a little impaired in respective capability and just the knack of doing the things that we did because we were forced to operate in a different model for so long, but so too were the third-party stakeholders who are ultimately out there, whether they are municipalities or others that need our support as much as anybody else, because oftentimes it's those parties that are so indispensable right at the last moment before substantial completion to make sure that we can bring these assets online and achieve the benefits associated with them. So we should have a thought for those stakeholders, other orders of government, because I think their capability, their capacity is equally on the critical pathway to operating as Joey suggests that we should, and I agree with him.
I would say, I mean, I think the point Joey made is very important. I think there's like two elements to it, though. Like if you drill down into it, I totally agree that you know, we're in a totally different world today. You know, we were used to the golden days of P3s were when you know, the world was a global economy and everybody was, the economies were, there were no borders to trade or very light borders to trade and very light restrictions. Following COVID, you know, war everywhere in the world, you know, we're really looking in a much more converging market. Everybody's like taking care of their own problems, which obviously has led to, you know, a lot of borderline recessions in many places in the world. And this is something that we have to live with. We're past COVID. Supply chain issues are still there. I think there's two issues, you know. One is the unexpected situation we are in, which is dealing with the consequences of, you know, having that fine-tuned model that now doesn't necessarily work with reality, and being able to collaborate to, you know, let's put the contract to the side, figure out what the right thing is to do. And I think the purpose of C2P3, this conference, us as you know, stakeholders, is actually to identify that this is where there's a flaw, right? This is where we can actually take some time to think about it and how we're fixing those same challenges that brought us to where we are today. You know, if there's an LD that is, you know, could take companies down or is just transferring, you know, magnitudes of financial impacts to a single private sector, let's fix that. Let's anticipate those. And we've been pretty like open about where are those issues? What should we know what are those unknowns, known unknowns that we're now facing, that we were crying a long time before. We need to fix this. Now we're dealing with, we didn't fix it, now's the time to actually fix it, right? So risk allocation, we're not past it. We haven't passed it. Risk allocation is still something, and the way to deal with the early stages of a project is still something that there's a lot of work to be done. Yes, I agree, on some asset classes it's a little easier to do because there's much less complexity. Construction phases are much shorter. You can actually, you know, price some of these risks without making the project double. But on a 10-year transit project, when you need to figure out supply chain issues over the next 10 years, that can sometimes, I wouldn't say double, but add significant amounts of pricing to a project. So I think it is on us still to figure out these elements that we need to fix, and there are some. And you know, we're always in constant communication and discussion about it, and we're being heard. And I think we're, again, like before, keeping it positive. We're in the right path. Still work to be done, sure.
So we did get a question, and I'm gonna maybe, Cory, start with you on it. And this is on something that Michael said earlier, that the third P should be psychology. perhaps instead of partnerships. And so how important is that from your point of view, Cory, as to putting together the right team to deliver a project?
Well, Linda, I don't know if this is quite on point to that specific question, but it's certainly related. Don't disagree with anything that our colleagues from the private sector have said here this morning. But I think what we also can't lose sight of is that in the public sphere, we can't behave as a government department exactly the way that a private entity would behave in terms of that public accountability and transparency. So that does create some challenges for us to be able to behave in that space the way that Joey and Eitan has described. When you grow up in the public sector, the way I have, doing public infrastructure, for years it was about competition and lowest price. So we've moved away from that, and best value is important and the most important. And the construct of the DBFM fixes a lot of those problems, but it's still, there's an expectation in the public that it's still competitive. So that's a challenging divide for us to bridge when we're talking about a model like progressive, where you don't have that fixed pricing at the beginning. So I think for our private partners, I think it's very important for them not to forget about that challenge in the public sphere. And now, to Joey's point, if there's not enough companies in that space to create the 3 bids, like, that's something we got to be able to talk about in a very intelligent way. But we will still need to find ways to tick that transparency and accountability box so that projects don't result in bad headlines.
And if I could build off of Cory's point, it's a really indispensable thing to remember. I do think that there is an obligation on us as contracting authorities to make sure that we're capable of existing in the new models that we're ultimately putting out there, right? And pick your adjective that starts with P. We want to be predictable. We want to be prescient. We want to perform. We want to be professional. As we use new models and have new types of discussions about risk, I know I speak for both of us when I say we're thinking about what that implies in respect of our human talent and our capacity and our decisiveness, which I would say unambiguously. It means something different to be in a progressive DB with a target price than it does in a DBFM, and I think we're introspecting quite actively on what that implies in respect to the practitioners that we want sitting across the table from the private sector. But Cory's point is a very, very important one. In transacting our business in the public sector, there are just certain inefficiencies, if I could put it that way, that attend to the way in which we do things. So, I'd say bear with us and thank you for continuing to help us grow and instructing us, because we need the specific feedback about how the things that we do that we think are going to have a certain type of impact on the other side actually land and resonate. And it's probably fair to say, and we can be honest with one another, that it'll take a generation or two of these projects in order to learn those lessons the right way. So I think we all have to be resilient in connection to that journey together.
Let's maybe follow the thread of progressive projects. And Joey, what's your reaction to that as being something that is a tool to address some concerns that you've expressed?
Yeah, I mean, here's where I get a little candid. Initially, I'll be very specific. Initially, I didn't like them, meaning that when we were looking at it, there were some concerns about whether or not it's essentially an early partnership model where you select a partner up front and then you figure it out. But it was being done in context of risk allocation and everything there. And to be very clear, different entities have different forms of progressives, but I think inherently they all have the same thing, which is that at the end of the progressive element of it, you enter into pretty much the exact same contract that you were going to enter into in a full DBFM. So really the question is what does it solve in the front end? And what it solves in the front end is in environments where you don't have the necessary competition, but you need transparency, you need the elements there, you need to be able to get the contracting authority comfortable that you're operating in good faith. In that instance, then we completely understand why that's done. Other instances where the client has kind of figured out partially where they want to get to, but rather than hire a PDC team and then bring it out, they'd rather early partner with someone and progressively figure it out. I think all that's there. Where I have a little bit of hesitancy is that, and it's the same problem we do over and over again. We get all excited by the next new shiny toy, the next new form of procurement. This is going to be the panacea that's going to solve everything. It won't. And in fact, when you look at it from the private sector perspective, like if we do have a dispute midway through construction, well, I've worked with the client on my budget. I've worked with the client on my schedule. Through that process, my price was driven down, my schedule was made tighter. They're aware of where all my contingency is or every single individual element. And so I don't know how it's going to play out, but I have a feeling as though I'm going to be at a disadvantage if there's any type of dispute. So I have concerns. That doesn't mean that the model shouldn't be used. That doesn't mean that we won't, go after a mega hospital where this is the model that's going to be employed. I absolutely think it's something that should be in the toolbox. I just sometimes get concerned that there was maybe about 9 months ago, every job I was hearing was going down progressive. It was just like it was going to solve all our problems. I don't believe it, but it will work.
Yeah.
For some.
And every job is not going down the progressive pathway, right? Quinte Health is a DVB. We used a CM metal in St. Thomas for a massive earthworks project for the VW battery assembly plant. I think where we thought there was a sweet spot was exactly where you were pointing us, Joey, right? These billion-dollar-plus hospitals where at the end of the day, we will always do things to try to encourage more competition, no surprise to anybody there. But I'll tell you that the thing that is most valuable to us so far about the deployment of the progressive model is a very specific conversation about the affordability of these jobs. Because let's be clear, whatever budgets any government, not just Ontario, was carrying for any of these massive projects in 2019, present budgets don't resemble that. And by the way, I must say thank you to our friends at the federal government for their continued co-investment here in Ontario, disproportionately in a lot of our projects. So yeah, I think this is exactly what I meant. First generation, we'll see how it goes. If we are ever seemingly analogizing too much from old models and old regimes of risk transfer and trying to port those through the back door of a progressive in ways that our market thinks is going to replicate old challenges, I have a metaphysic certainty that you will tell us that that's the case, and we will be listening for sure.
I think that, from an Aecon's perspective, we actually looking at those more complex projects, linear, civil, transit, transportation. We believe progressive is the actual way to go. I think, we've seen it, and we've actually even taken it outside of Canada, internationally, to projects that are, renewable energy, airports, not necessarily within Canada. We've taken it, and we're trying to actually grow that model to a way to actually make these projects happen. The benefits are vast. I think, affordability. Being able through a 9 month, 12 months, 18 month process to actually get to what is the real price of this project. Once we get over the fact that we can actually trust each other, and the third P, which is partnership, not psychology, actually gets there, and we can actually understand that no one's here to, we're almost open books, No one's here to rob the stable, right? Once we get over that, getting to the right affordability number and the right budget and being able to inform governments and policymakers and what does it actually cost to build this road or this transit system, you get there through collaborative process and a progressive model. Those risks that we've identified, developing the design to a stage where it's, we've actually, you can identify some of those unknowns that you're trying to sometimes transfer through a risk allocation mechanism. You actually mitigate some of them by actually talking through it. The procurement process itself also, rather than having 3 bidders going after a 30% design, spending millions of dollars through a procurement process, you can probably save that by doing, I don't like to call it a beauty contest, but selecting not necessarily on the lowest price to bid, and actually moving together to identify what the project, that's going to save some taxpayers' money on the procurement side as well. And definitely fine-tuning, that is the way to fine-tune the contract that you eventually sign. I know collaborative and progressive has been used in the social projects, not necessarily in Ontario and other provinces yet on civil. I don't see why not. I think that's a natural evolution of the market, is progressive to DBFM on roads, maybe transit, again, with the necessary tweaks to the actual contract and the risk allocation. I think that is the way to go. Every project that is put in front of us that is leading to a lump sum fixed price, we try to change it. We say, no, this doesn't make sense. We've seen the issues with it. We need to actually talk, get to the right solution, and that's the way to get successful projects.
Fantastic. I'm just looking at more questions that have been posed to us, and Cory, maybe I'll ask you to use Corner Brook as an example of what did you do actively as the public sector to help your private sector partner mitigate supply chain challenges, because those are very real and they will continue for quite some time.
So Linda, at risk of oversimplifying the answer, I think the most important thing that we have done and we can continue to do is listen. I'm going to compete now with some of our colleagues across the country, but some of the feedback that we have received from our private partners is that we are there, we are ready to listen and have those conversations, and yes, the project agreement has to govern, but to Joey's point, we also need to recognize that not everything is figured out inside of that project agreement, so we have to at least try to be nimble enough to be able to work inside the PA, but to find the right solutions. And I know you asked specifically about Corner Brook as we go into the next wave of projects, and I'm very optimistic and hopeful that we will still be able to get competitive competition in our process, and we'll listen at the CCMs. The project agreement is called a draft for a reason, and we'll listen at those at those CCM meetings, take on the feedback that we get from the private partners, and massage it however it needs to be massaged in order to make it work. Because we can't put our blinders on and pretend, if they're raising an issue, that it's not an issue. So I think we've done that in our projects, and we'll continue to do that. Newfoundland and Labrador, we are as we move to consider models like progressive. We're going to look to our colleagues at IO to help us understand. Those are not simple things to build up for. These are complex negotiations, and we need to make sure as a public entity that we're properly prepared and equipped for that. So we certainly appreciate the leadership that the larger jurisdictions in Canada show towards that space, and we'll continue to follow that leadership and learn as they are learning. So I'll just come back again, and we need to listen, and we will.
Thank you, Cory. So yet another question, and I think you've hit a little bit of a chord on this psychology thing, Michael.
That came from somebody in the audience. That was a nice suggestion.
Oh, okay. There's a question. Collaborative behavioral assessments were mentioned. What benefits does IO hope to get from those frameworks in its evaluation?
So it's a very good question. And here, actually, I'll sound a note that's very similar to the one that Joey just put on the table. The theory of the case is that you can, through various mechanisms, typically facilitated interactions, try to identify during the process of evaluating a partner who's got a bid in front of you, just how collaborative the two teams will be with one another. A lot of this has been done in the UK, for instance, as they got ready to deliver a variety of things via alliancing. And we've tried to incorporate elements of this on the transit, but also now increasingly on the social side, to try to identify, the base expectation, I suppose I would say, of just how collaborative any partner would be to us. Most of this comes with third parties that facilitate these types of sessions. I will just put my hand on my heart and tell you that this is one of those adaptations that I think I'm watching quite closely. Because for me, I always want to make sure that with a real sharpness and a real precision, we can actually identify meaningful differences as between bidders to us, especially if we're going to be attaching points in a public tender to that. But I think that this is something that's been used by other jurisdictions, and I would say right now we're experimenting with it too. I would say that the doing of that, one of my key concerns, I suppose, a little bit, is just how it translates into actual dynamic once you have a delivery partner selected across from you. It means something, well, it needs to mean something that the collaborative behavioral assessment that you do on Garden City Skyway, progressive DB, thanks to lots of good feedback from the market, translates into the actual dynamic that prevails during the job. So back to the point that I was making, Linda, like first generation, second generation, the implementation of these tools, I think we're looking not only to evaluate for ourselves how they're going, but also we need the feedback from the market as to how you're experiencing it and whether you feel that there's value to it as well. But I'm happy that we're trying to incorporate some sense of collaboration into our procurement projects, if only because I think that's a two-way street. When these things work well, the evaluation done by the third party is as much about the team that the contracting authority is putting into the room as the private sector. And that's an important realization for us too.
I think, sorry. I was just going to say, I think, at the end of the day, the goal of both sides is to actually partner and, talk to each other and be able to, and this is just a proxy, a tool to being able to, interpret or forecast the ability to do that. At the end of the day, it's not necessarily, it's sometimes, the bigger culture of organizations that actually gets deals done, but at the end of the day, it's people that get deals done. It's the teams that are on both sides. And this is just a tool for, you can look at it skeptically and say, oh, this is like a lot of theoretical or academic ways of trying to get there. But, if it's gonna help us, why not try it? So we should do it. And I think we've been through, at Aecon, we've been through a few. I think it's pretty indicative of ability to work through a progressive process together. So I actually support it, and I think it's pretty good.
Joey, your thoughts?
Here's where the candid comes out. I don't believe that we should be assigning points to it. My wife reminds me all the time that I was absolutely charming on our first couple of dates. So, and then when she lived with me, it was a different matter. So it comes down to that. So I would say I think it could be used as part of it to make sure you understand the organization. But I think if you allocate too many points or too much concentration on it, it won't be successful.
And therefore, we need the feedback from the market as to what replaces it, right? Because the very next question is about why wouldn't you use full-blown alliancing for all projects in jurisdiction, which has an even higher coefficient for contracting authorities when it comes to how we achieve a collaborative gear, right? So This is an excellent example of precisely the feedback I'm pointing at. I think part of the move to adopt these sorts of assessments, these sorts of models, have surely come from this conversation that we're having. And if the things that we're trying to do within our procurement processes do not give us reliable signal, but just noise in respect of what it means to be collaborative, then we need together to define what comes in its place. And that's a challenge not just for contracting authorities, but I think for our industry.
I think that's maybe a great place to leave it. We've started, I think, a terrific dialogue and kickstarted the conversation. I want to thank all of you for being our panelists today and to Aecon for supporting this opening conversation, setting up the key themes and big issues on which we'll focus the conference. Can I have a big hand for our panelists, please?